The phone rang at 4:23 a.m. on March 8th. Denzel Washington was in his home office, preparing for another grueling day of Malcolm X preparation, when he saw his sister Larissa's number flashing on the caller ID. She never called this early. Never. His hand trembled as he picked up the receiver, and the words that came through the phone were every son's worst nightmare. "Denzel, you need to come home. Daddy's in the hospital. The doctors, they don't think he's going to make it." But this wasn't just any father-son relationship. For 36 years, Denzel Washington and his father had barely spoken. Their last real conversation had ended in anger, disappointment, and words that both men had regretted for decades. Now, with his father lying unconscious in Mount Vernon Hospital, Denzel faced a choice that would either heal a lifetime of wounds or leave them broken forever. What happened in the next 72 hours wouldn't just change Denzel's relationship with his father, it would transform his understanding of forgiveness, family, and what it truly means to be a man. The phone call that made him cry would become the conversation that made him complete. We've all been there, standing at the threshold of a relationship that feels beyond repair, wondering if it's too late to fix what's been broken for years. That crushing weight of unfinished business, unspoken apologies, and the terrifying possibility that time might run out before we find the courage to try again. That's exactly where Denzel Washington found himself on that March morning in 19. But this wasn't just about one family's struggle. This was about the universal experience of fathers and sons, the misunderstandings, the different dreams, the generation gap that can feel like an unbridgeable canyon. In African American families, this dynamic carried additional weight: the pressure of breaking cycles, the challenge of success guilt, the complexity of sons surpassing their father's achievements while still craving their approval. Denzel's father, Denzel Hayes Washington Sr., was a Pentecostal minister who had worked multiple jobs to keep his family afloat. He was a man of discipline, faith, and traditional values who had watched his son choose a profession he couldn't understand and a lifestyle that seemed to contradict everything he had tried to teach him. The distance between them had grown with each of Denzel's successes, each red carpet appearance, each role that took him further from the Mount Vernon boy his father had raised. But what Denzel discovered when he arrived at the hospital would change everything he thought he knew about his father. The flight from Los Angeles to New York felt like the longest 3 hours of Denzel's life. He sat in first class, staring out the window, replaying every argument, every disappointment, every missed opportunity to bridge the gap between them. His last conversation with his father had been 6 months earlier, a tense exchange about Denzel's upcoming role as Malcolm X. "Son, I don't understand why you want to play that man," his father had said. Malcolm X was angry, divisive. "Why can't you play someone who brings people together instead of driving them apart?" Denzel had tried to explain the historical importance, the artistic challenge, the cultural significance, but his father had simply said, "I raised you to be a bridge, not a bomb," and hung up the phone. Those words had haunted Denzel for months. His father, the man who had sacrificed everything to give his children opportunities he'd never had, couldn't understand why Denzel was choosing roles that made white audiences uncomfortable. When Denzel arrived at Mount Vernon Hospital, he found his mother Lennis in the waiting room, surrounded by family members he hadn't seen in years. The sight of his strong, dignified mother looking so small and frightened broke something inside him, but it was what the doctors told him that made Denzel realize how little time he had left to make things right. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the attending physician, pulled Denzel aside and spoke the words that every child dreads. "Mr. Washington, your father suffered a massive stroke. The damage is extensive. He's conscious, but his speech is severely limited, and we don't expect him to survive more than a few days." Denzel felt the world tilt on its axis. A few days. After 36 years of unfinished conversations, he had maybe 72 hours to find a way to connect with a man who had been both his greatest inspiration and his most difficult relationship. Can he understand what people are saying to him? Denzel asked. "We believe so," Dr. Morrison replied. "His cognitive function appears intact. It's the physical expression that's been compromised." Standing outside his father's room, Denzel realized he had no idea what to say. How do you heal 3 decades of misunderstanding in a matter of hours? How do you tell your father you love him when you're not even sure you understand each other? He pushed open the door and saw his father for the first time in 6 months. What his father did the moment he saw Denzel enter the room shocked everyone, including the nurses. Denzel Sr. was connected to machines, tubes running from his nose and arms, his once powerful frame looking fragile against the hospital bed's white sheets. But when he saw his son enter the room, something extraordinary happened. His eyes, which had been vacant and unfocused, suddenly became alert and intense. With tremendous effort, he lifted his left hand, the only one not restricted by IV lines, and pointed directly at Denzel.
Then, using every ounce of strength he had, he whispered 2 words that the nurses later said they would never forget. My son. Not Denzel, not boy, not even his name, my son. 36 years of complexity, disappointment, and misunderstanding seemed to dissolve in those 2 words. Denzel moved to his father's bedside and took his hand, and for the first time since he was a child, he felt completely accepted by the man who had shaped him. But it was what happened next that would change both their lives in ways neither had expected. Sitting by his father's bedside, Denzel began to understand things about their relationship that he had been too proud or too hurt to see before. Dad, Denzel said, still holding his father's hand, I need to tell you some things. And I need to understand some things too. His father squeezed his hand weakly, a signal to continue. I know you think some of the roles I've chosen have been difficult, but I need you to understand why I chose them. When I played Malcolm X, I wasn't trying to promote anger or division. I was trying to show the complexity of a man who evolved, who grew, who learned that love and justice could coexist. Denzel Sr. listened, his eyes never leaving his son's face. You taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. You taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats people who can't help him. Every role I've chosen has been about dignity, about showing that black men can be complex, intelligent, powerful, and moral. For the first time in decades, Denzel felt like his father was really hearing him, not judging him, not trying to correct him, just listening. Then something unexpected happened. His father began to cry. The reason his father was crying would reveal a truth that Denzel never could have imagined. Through tremendous effort, Denzel Sr. managed to whisper, I was proud. What, Dad? Always proud. The words came out slowly, painfully, but with absolute clarity. Denzel felt his own eyes fill with tears. Then why? Why did it always feel like you disapproved? His father's response came in fragments, but each word carried the weight of decades of miscommunication. Scared, for you. White, world, dangerous, wanted, you, safe. Suddenly Denzel understood. His father's criticism hadn't been about disapproval, it had been about fear. Fear that his son's success would make him a target. Fear that playing controversial roles would limit his opportunities. Fear that the same system that had denied him opportunities would find ways to punish his son for being too bold, too authentic, too uncompromising. Dad, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little? You used to say, son, you can be anything you want to be, but never forget who you are. His father nodded weakly. Every role I've taken, every choice I've made has been about remembering who I am. You taught me that. But it was what Denzel said next that made his father struggle to sit up in his hospital bed. Dad, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you think I've made you proud, or do you think I've disappointed you? The question hung in the air like a challenge, like everything that had been unspoken between them for 36 years. Denzel Sr. looked at his son with an intensity that seemed to cut through all the machines, all the medical equipment, all the barriers that stroke and time had created. With more effort than he had shown since the stroke, Denzel Sr. tried to sit up. The movement triggered alarms on his monitors, and nurses rushed in, but he waved them away with his functioning hand. He had something to say, and nothing was going to stop him. Bring me mirror, he whispered to one of the nurses. Dad, you don't need, Denzel started to protest. Mirror, his father repeated, more firmly. When the nurse brought a small hand mirror, Denzel Sr. took it and held it up so that both he and his son could see their reflection together. 2 men, separated by a generation but sharing the same eyes, the same determined jawline, the same deep intensity. Look, his father whispered. Denzel looked at their reflection and saw what his father was trying to show him. What his father revealed in that mirror would change Denzel's understanding of success forever. You look like me, his father said, pointing at their reflection. But you became more. Denzel was confused. Dad, I don't understand. His father took a shaky breath and continued. I worked 3 jobs so you wouldn't have to. I stayed quiet so you could speak. I accepted less so you could demand more. The words hit Denzel like a physical blow. His father wasn't saying he was disappointed. He was saying that Denzel's success, his outspokenness, his refusal to accept limitations, was the fulfillment of everything his father had sacrificed for. Every role you choose, every stand you take, you do for both of us, his father continued. You are my voice in places I could never go. Denzel realized that his father's criticism over the years hadn't been about wanting him to be smaller. It had been about fear that the world would try to make him smaller, and a father's desperate attempt to protect his son from disappointment. Dad, Denzel said, his voice breaking, I wish I had understood this years ago. Understand now, his father whispered. That's what matters. Then Denzel asked the question that had been haunting him since childhood, and his father's answer changed everything. Dad, do you remember when I told you I wanted to be an actor? I was 17, and you didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I always thought you were ashamed of me. His father's eyes filled with tears again, and he shook his head slowly. Not ashamed, terrified. Why? Because I knew you would succeed, and success makes you target. I wanted to prepare you for that. Denzel suddenly understood that every stern conversation, every critical comment, every moment of apparent disapproval had been his father's way of trying to armor him for a world that would judge him more harshly because of his color, his talent, and his refusal to compromise. You were training me, Denzel said, the realization hitting him like revelation. Making you stronger. No, his father whispered with a slight smile. You are. The conversation they were having was healing decades of wounds, but it was also revealing the profound love and understanding that had always been there, buried under years of protection and misinterpretation. What happened next proved that some bonds between fathers and sons transcend even death. Over the next 2 days, Denzel barely left his father's bedside. They talked about everything: his childhood, his career, his marriage to Pauletta, his children, his dreams, his fears. His father's speech gradually became clearer, as if the emotional breakthrough had somehow improved his physical condition. On the 3rd day, something remarkable happened. Denzel Sr. asked his son to read to him from the Bible, not because he was religious, but because he wanted to hear Denzel's voice bring the words to life. Denzel chose Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." As he read, his father closed his eyes and smiled, the first genuine smile Denzel had seen from him in years. "You have gift," his father said when Denzel finished. "Not just acting, you make words matter. I learned that from you, Dad, from listening to your sermons." "No," his father said firmly, "you made it better. You took what I gave you and made it art." That evening, as Denzel prepared to return to Los Angeles to continue filming Malcolm X, his father asked him one final question: "Are you happy?" Denzel thought about it honestly. "I'm successful, Dad. I'm not sure that's the same thing as happy." His father nodded. "Then, find happiness. Success without joy is just noise." 3 weeks later, Denzel received another phone call that would test everything his father had taught him about strength and love. Denzel Sr. had made a remarkable recovery. Against all medical predictions, he had regained most of his speech and motor function. The doctors called it unprecedented. The family called it a miracle. But what happened next proved that miracles sometimes come with unexpected challenges. "Son," his father said during their weekly phone call, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Anything, Dad. I want to come to the premiere of Malcolm X." Denzel was stunned. His father had never attended any of his movie premieres. He had always said he preferred to watch his son's work in private, away from the crowds and cameras. "Dad, are you sure? It's going to be a big event. Lots of media attention. That's exactly why I need to be there," his father replied. "For 36 years, I was afraid that your success would make you a target. But I realized something during those days in the hospital. I was so busy trying to protect you from the world that I forgot to let you know I was proud of you in public." The premiere was 3 months away, and Denzel knew his father's attendance would create a media sensation. But more than that, it would be a public declaration of something that had been private for too long. What happened at the Malcolm X premiere left the entire entertainment industry talking for years. November 18th, 19th, the red carpet was lined with reporters, photographers, and fans eager to see Denzel Washington's most ambitious project. But when a modest, dignified older man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out of the limousine behind Denzel, the entire atmosphere changed. Denzel Sr. had not just come to support his son, he had come to claim his place as the father of one of Hollywood's most important actors, and he was ready to answer questions. "Reverend Washington," a reporter called out, "how do you feel about your son playing such a controversial figure?" Denzel Jr. tensed, remembering all their old arguments about this very issue. But his father's response shocked everyone, including his son. "My son doesn't play controversial figures," Denzel Sr. said with quiet authority. "He plays complex human beings, and Malcolm X was one of the most complex and ultimately loving figures in American history. I'm proud that my son had the courage to tell his complete story." Another reporter asked, "Were you always supportive of Denzel's acting career?" Denzel Sr. paused, looked at his son, and then spoke words that would be quoted for decades. "I spent years trying to protect my son from a world that I thought would try to diminish him. But I realized that I raised a man who doesn't get diminished. He elevates everything he touches. I'm not here tonight as someone who supports his career. I'm here as someone who has learned from his example." Inside the theater, as they watched Malcolm X together, something happened that completed the healing that had started in that hospital room. During the scene where Malcolm X speaks about the importance of family and forgiveness, Denzel Sr. leaned over to his son and whispered, "You didn't just play Malcolm, you understood him." "What do you mean, Dad?" "Malcolm's journey from anger to understanding, from separation to inclusion. That's not just his story. That's our story. That's the story of fathers and sons learning to see each other clearly." As the credits rolled and the audience erupted in applause, Denzel Sr. stood up and applauded not just the film, but his son's courage to tell difficult truths with compassion and complexity. The reviews of Malcolm X were extraordinary, but the moment that mattered most to Denzel was when his father turned to him and said, "I finally understand what you've been trying to do all these years. You're not just entertaining people, you're helping them understand themselves." But the most powerful moment came 6 months later, in a conversation that proved the phone call that made Denzel cry had transformed both their lives. Father's Day.
Denzel was at his father's house in Mount Vernon, watching his own children play in the same backyard where he had grown up. 4 generations of Washingtons were together, and the harmony was something Denzel had never thought possible. "Dad," Denzel said as they sat on the porch, "I need to thank you for something." "What's that, son?" "For teaching me that love doesn't always look like approval, for showing me that sometimes the people who push us the hardest are the ones who believe in us the most." His father smiled. "You taught me something too." "What's that?" "You taught me that protection and pride don't have to be enemies. I can be proud of your strength and still want to shield you from pain, but more than that, you taught me that the best way to protect you is to trust what I raised you to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play, each man finally understanding the other completely. That phone call on March 8, 1991, didn't just save a relationship, it created a legacy of understanding that would influence how Denzel approached every role and every relationship for the rest of his life. Denzel Sr. lived for 14 more years, and during that time he became his son's most trusted advisor and biggest supporter. He attended premieres, gave interviews, and became a visible symbol of fatherly pride and support. More importantly, the understanding they reached influenced how Denzel raised his own children. John David Washington, who became an actor and football player, later said, "My father never tried to protect me from my ambitions. He taught me that the best protection is preparation and authenticity." The phone call that made Denzel cry became the conversation that made him complete, teaching us something profound about the complexity of love and the power of understanding. Sometimes the people who seem to oppose our dreams are actually the ones who love us enough to prepare us for the challenges those dreams will bring. Sometimes criticism is love wearing the mask of protection. Sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the deepest healing. Denzel Washington's relationship with his father reminds us that it's never too late to bridge understanding, never too late to see someone clearly, never too late to transform conflict into connection. The man who answered that phone call in tears discovered that some of life's most painful moments can become doorways to its most beautiful relationships. The father who had seemed like his biggest critic revealed himself to be his most devoted supporter. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, that love sometimes speaks in languages we don't initially understand, but when we learn to translate those languages, we discover depths of affection and support that we never knew existed. The phone call that every son fears became the conversation that made both father and son finally see each other clearly, not as disappointment or disapproval, but as two men who loved each other enough to want the very best, even when they disagreed about what that looked like.